I'd like to call the Gurnee Village Board Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Roll call, please, Andy.
Ross. Garner.
Here.
O'Brien.
Present.
Balmas.
Present.
Hood.
Here.
Thorstensen.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome. It's nice to see so many people here for a Committee of the Whole meeting. This is an informal discussion tonight. It's a discussion on the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which, as many of you know, legalizes the possession and private use of cannabis for Illinois residents over 21 as of January 1st, 2020. This is a decision that the board is going to have to make for the community. So tonight we will have presentations from our village attorney, Brian Winters, our public crime prevention officer. I was going to call you something else. Sean Torres, our community development director, David Ziegler. We also have a group of students from a group called Catalyst in Stevenson High School. They'll be making a presentation, and we have a business owner that's interested in opening a dispensary, Paul Gillum. So then we'll allow the trustees to ask questions, and then we'll take comments from the public to help the board make an informed decision. So that's kind of the agenda tonight. So, Mr. Winter, you get to go first.
Okay. Yes, earlier this year, a majority in the Illinois state legislature passed, and the governor signed a bill. It's called the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. This act will make it legal to possess and to use recreational cannabis starting January 1, 2020 in Illinois. I think perhaps how the state or the current state's view on cannabis can perhaps be best explained by certain findings in the act. The state legislature actually made certain findings at the very beginning of the act, and this slide shows that very first paragraph. Under section 7-1, it says, in the interest of allowing law enforcement to focus on violent and property crimes, generating revenue for education, substance abuse prevention and treatment, freeing public resources to invest in communities and other public purposes, and individual freedom, cannabis should be taxed in a manner similar to alcohol. So you can see from this statement there are really 3 different reasons presented for changing the law according to Springfield. The first is to end the costs associated with prohibiting cannabis, and essentially the terminology was to redirect police enforcement efforts. Yeah, we're back to the first slide yet. The second aspect was it talks about taxing and spending cannabis revenues for public purposes. And third, there's just a brief statement about individual personal freedoms. If we look at the next slide, these findings continued, and in paragraph B, they set forth 6 items to address public safety and health. Again, in this section it says, in the interest of the health and public safety of the residents of Illinois, the state further finds and declares that cannabis should be regulated in a manner similar to alcohol. You can see the connection that the state legislature is making, so that 1, persons will have to show proof of age before purchasing cannabis. 2, selling, distributing, or transferring cannabis to minors and other persons under 21 years of age shall remain illegal. So these are statements alerting the public that they are protecting, in their view, children by enforcing the same regulations that apply to alcohol. Subparagraph 3 here, drivers under the influence of cannabis shall remain illegal. Another statement trying to address the statement of public right-of-ways, and again, utilizing the same standard. I think there might be other speakers that will perhaps make distinctions as to whether that's going to be possible or not. Also in paragraph 4, Some other findings: if legalized, for legitimate tax-paying business people and not criminal actors will conduct sales of cannabis. So this is a clear reference that the legislators in Springfield have identified that they want to put an end to illicit street sales, and this also works hand in hand with their efforts to raise revenue. Under paragraph 5, this statement: if legalized, cannabis sold in the state will be tested, labeled, and subject to additional regulations to ensure that purchasers are informed and protected. This really is referencing the imposition of product safety standards. Again, I think this statement's in the bill or in the act because the legislators wanted to distinguish the difference between street drugs and what would be sold at legal cannabis dispensaries. And then you have subparagraph 6, purchasers will be informed of any known health risks associated with the use of cannabis as conducted by evidence-based peer review research, otherwise known as public health hazard warnings. Again, this is just what the act says, and I want to let the board and the public understand that. If we go to the next slide, the state kind of concluded their findings, and this was a section under at the very beginning where they gave really 3 procedural findings. In paragraph C, they basically said the state is going to mandate uniform application throughout the state. So possession and use is going to be legal throughout the state, and that's mandated here, and there's a reference to it in this paragraph C. Paragraph D says that there's not going to be any changes to the Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act. So basically, although there's going to be some refinements and there were different diagnoses that will qualify, this is not going to directly affect the medical cannabis per se. The final paragraph here is subparagraph E, and this is just a statement that shows there is tension between federal law and state law, and also with employment work rules. And paragraph E says, work rules, I'll paraphrase first, work rules will decide usage of cannabis at work. So if you're at if you work at a position where cannabis is prohibited, that governs, and you could be disciplined if you violated their company policies. So this is in the act. None of these findings directly discuss the potential social costs for legalizing cannabis, but the act does provide municipalities with an opt-out provision, and to some extent that does allow for discussion of whether this is a good direction or not. However, there are limits. So if we go to the next slide. Basically, initially, when they were considering this bill, the Illinois Municipal League was opposed to it. The League made several suggestions, one of which was to allow for an opt-out provision for municipalities. They did make that part of the act. Eventually, the Illinois Municipal League took a neutral position on this as opposed to being against it. But this opt-out provision has severe limitations. So municipalities may discuss this issue and they can enact ordinances, but essentially the only type of ordinances they can enact is to exercise the opt-out provision and strictly prohibit cannabis business establishments within the village limits, or 2, they could restrict where they're located and some of the business rules that would affect those businesses. And the understanding at this point is that there could be restrictions placed on the number, but we're going to talk about that in another slide. If we go to the next slide, what municipalities cannot do, as I've already stated, is you cannot restrict the use or possession. Also, there is a provision that allows for home cultivation up to 5 plants. There still may be some questions as to how they define 5 plants, but again, the village cannot prohibit that under the act. If we go to the next slide, as you could see from the findings that the state legislature made, they definitely were making a cost-benefit analysis. They presented that, and how that translates is in terms of tax revenue. There is a local component and there is a state component. At the local level, the act provides that a village could impose a 3% local cannabis tax, and there's also thought that the 1% regular sales tax would still apply. And in the village of Gurnee, we have a 1% we do have a home rule. It should not say non, we are home rule, and we have a 1% home rule sales tax. So it can add up, and we'll talk about that in 2 or 3 slides. But let's first talk about the state. The state definitely considered the revenues. In fact, they even divvied it up between 7 different categories where tax revenue collected by the state would go. The top one is State General Revenue Fund, but they even have 10% going to pay unpaid bills. So that certainly is an element of this act, and it's in the title of the act because the state is anticipating that it's going to raise a lot of revenue. If we go to the next slide, in order to get a view of how this might play out in Lake County, we have we've kind of had a preview of what communities have allowed medical dispensaries. And the thought is that if there's a medical dispensary, those owners will want to also have the additional benefit of being able to sell recreational. So currently, these are the 4 locations that I've been advised exist within the county: Mundelein, Buffalo Grove, Highland Park, Deerfield. We are aware that there are other communities that are considering the possibility of permitting recreational cannabis. And I'm not sure that any of the existing medical dispensary villages have formally adopted a position, and it is my understanding that maybe Highland Park is considering not allowing recreational, but that's to be determined. That just gives you a point of reference as to where we might be right now. In terms of the local revenue, if we can go to the next slide, what is very important is that these dispensaries are going to have to obtain a license from the state, just like the medical dispensaries. And the projection is, or the wording of the statute allows basically approximately 73 dispensaries in the entire state that could be operational by the end of next year. That earlier slide said that one projection is that there could be $1.6 billion worth of cannabis sales. If you divide that by 73 dispensaries, and I'm not saying that's how it's going to work, because obviously the collar counties are going to have more business than a downstate dispensary, but you could really project that there could be significant sales at each one of these dispensaries. And in fact, some villages have made some estimates as to what the local tax revenue would be, and it fits in somewhere between 250,000 to 400,000. You know, could be numbers that could be achieved in this first year. You can see by the end of 2021, there is a second wave of dispensary license that will be issued. It'll go up to 110, and then there's going to be future growth by the end of 2024 of 500 dispensaries. Because you have to remember that the state legislature is aware that with the taxing component and with other safeguards that they've written in, the price of cannabis will be higher at a dispensary than what is known to be the going rate on illicit street exchanges. In order to reduce that disparity in price, they're going to need to have more dispensaries. They're going to have to be more readily available. And so that's why that number, pursuant to the statute, is going to grow. At 500 dispensaries, if you spread out that $1.6 billion, you know, the tax revenue will decrease for each one of those dispensaries and it may go down. I think we've been told Lake County had a symposium on this, and they estimated that that figure could go down to $100,000 that would be realized per year on an annual basis per year from revenue from cannabis sales. So the other thing to point out is that medical marijuana will be cost less than recreational, and there will be some certain priorities given. So if there is a supply and demand issue, people that have prescriptions for medical marijuana will be served first. I have a final slide here on advertising. There have been other states that have legalized marijuana, and some of the advertising has been really viewed as unseemly, you know, Dr. Reefer, billboards and everything. The state appears to have addressed that issue, but I would point out that if there's only going to be 73 dispensaries, once they open up, I think there will be, you know, the need from the viewpoint of the dispensaries to advertise where their locations are in order for them to be fully operational. So even though there does seem to be some strict restrictions, and maybe David Ziegler might, I think he has a slide talking about this, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be advertising, so that if there is a dispensary in your village, chances are that dispensary will be noting that to the public as to its location. The final slide here is questions, but actually, and actions required. Because we have a couple other speakers, I'm going to hold off in inviting questions at this point until all of the presenters from the village have talked. But essentially, one of the purposes for tonight is to decide whether, to begin thinking about whether the village, it will be a board decision as to whether it wants to opt out and strictly prohibit dispensaries altogether within the village limits, or another alternative would be to say that they are going to be permitted. The village was required to pass zoning regulations to allow for medical dispensaries, and it would be possible to draft zoning provisions similar for recreational cannabis. A final option, it's really just a variation of the first option, and this is something that apparently Grays Lake has done recently, is exercising the right of an opt-out with a sunset provision, if not extended. So that's really, if you opted out before the beginning of the year, you could amend that at any time, and in fact, you know, that's happened with some of the video gaming where there was a similar opt-out provision. So you know, I'm not entirely sure, you know, the sunset provision, that's something that you would write in, but that kind of forces another decision to be made at a specific time versus option number one. So that's in a very broad outline, really just kind of providing you with what the words of the act and why this legislation, the reasons given by the state legislature as to why they're changing the law.
Thank you, Brian. And we will open it up to trustees in a little bit for questions. Next, we're going to have Sean Torres, our crime prevention officer, which does not nearly capture everything that Sean works on. But she's been doing, she's going to walk through some of the law enforcement impacts to the community.
I used to be a cheerleader, so I could yell it. That's easier. Is this one on here? I can talk through. Oh, yeah, I can just talk through this. That's fine. All right, so good evening. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Officer Sean Gaylor with the Gurnee Police Department. As she mentioned, I am the crime prevention officer with the department, so it's typically my job to review a lot of the statistical information that comes out about different topics around the country and then as well as locally. So for this particular presentation, I will give you an overview of some of the statistics that we've looked at from a law enforcement perspective and what our concerns are regarding the legalization of cannabis. So we are in a position of other states have already legalized cannabis, and so we can kind of take a look at those numbers and see where we're at and how they're reflecting against law enforcement and what their activities have been. So you can see here Colorado has already seen an increase in driving under the influence when it comes to medical marijuana as well as legalized marijuana. Washington has also seen an increase in fatalities from driving under the influence as well. And in Oregon, they have also discovered from their drug recognition experts that people who are driving under the influence are under the influence of marijuana. So as you can already tell, some of the bigger concerns that we have here locally would be driving under the influence. We already have a pretty high standard as far as driving under the influence of alcohol. This would be an added thing that we would be paying attention to. In order for us as officers to be prepared for that, there is a significant cost for us to go through training to make sure that we are fully aware of what we're looking for, what are the indicators, what are the signs that somebody is impaired while driving. In order to do that, right now there's only a few officers in all of Lake County that are qualified to determine if somebody is driving under the influence of marijuana. It's a very rigorous process to go through that training, and you'll see here there's a 3-phase training process that the officers must go through. The first, as a requirement, you must be an officer for at least 2 years, and you must be highly qualified as a standard field sobriety technician to indicate if somebody is impaired with alcohol. You have to know those baselines before you can even qualify to go to classes to learn about being a drug recognition expert. Once you pass those qualifications, you then spend several weeks in school in a classroom setting. Following that instruction, you then have the process of being certified. And what that means is you're going to go through a process over a 6-month period of going through practicums, going to real-life experiences, and then a board of your peers will determine if you have reached the status of certification to be qualified as a drug recognition expert. The cost to do so is high, as you can imagine, because it's a quite lengthy process to go through that training. And you must be recertified every 2 years to make sure that you are up to date with the most standardized process of determining that recognition. As I mentioned, there's only a few officers in the county right now that are even qualified to do so. So what we've been doing in this process, we have one officer who just recently passed his certification. In the past, we've had to call upon officers from other departments to try to come and help us, and that can take an extended period of time to get those officers to come to our location to determine if we have an impaired driver. The other thing that is of concern is there's no reliable detection device. As most of you know, if you're driving under the influence of alcohol, there is a detection device that will help aid in that process to determine if somebody is influenced by alcohol. That's not the case with cannabis. So that's where these drug recognition experts come in, because they are trained and taught about how to recognize those symptoms and indicators that maybe somebody is impaired. There's also been discussions about the canine officers. Most of you realize that dogs have the ability to sniff at thousands of times enhancement than what we are able to do. And that's what they've been doing for their entire career. Now that cannabis is legal, or will become legal, there's the debate of whether or not there's a purpose for that. Do they need to be retrained so that they don't indicate on cannabis? Is that even possible? To retrain is a very highly expensive process, and that's a continued debate and something that we need to be aware of that might be coming down the road. Continual training for our officers as we start to learn more about cannabis and how it becomes legal and how it can affect people in the community. That means continual training for our officers as well, to be up to date on the laws and the regulations and to know what they can and cannot enforce. The other things that we worry about is public safety in general. As we've seen from the other states that we've talked about, Colorado, for instance, here has seen an increase in their property crimes and their violent crimes, all as a result after the legalization of cannabis. Alaska has also seen that as well, as more in their felony crimes, mostly in larceny and vehicle thefts. So in closing here, just a few key points to consider. As far as the marijuana dispensaries, they're finding that in most of these states where there's a high density of dispensaries, there tends to be more crime that comes along with that. So as we consider possibly putting these in our village, that's something that we need to take into consideration, that there may be violent crime that comes along with those dispensaries. There's also the education of the public that we need to be aware of. As law enforcement officers, we speak with people on a daily basis. While they realize that cannabis is legal, they don't realize where and when they can use that cannabis. So it becomes a process of us educating the public, and that creates more calls for service, more interactions with the public, taking us away from other calls that we could be taking. So those are some of the things that we need to keep in mind as well. As this was already mentioned earlier, the projected cost of cannabis in these dispensaries is going to be much higher than what somebody could get on the street. So what we're starting to see in these other states is that those who don't have as much money to purchase the legalized cannabis will go back to the street and purchase it on the street, or they may result to more violent crime where they start to conduct robberies. They'll go into these dispensaries and try to take what they can without actually purchasing it. And again, that's where the law enforcement side of it gets involved, where we have to try to sustain and control that environment so those kind of activities don't occur. Okay. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And I would remind the board, whether we opt in or opt out, everything Sean said, we're going to have to account for and budget for, and make sure that our public safety is supported on additional enforcement. So, but that's a good overview. Thank you. Next up, David Ziegler is head of our community development, and he's been doing research and working with the county on their task force. So he's going to kind of walk through some of our options.
Thank you, Mayor. Last week, I had the opportunity to attend a task force meeting with Lake County that was put on by Lake County. Very beneficial. I attended with Clara Gable and was able to obtain a copy of the zoning aspects of the cannabis regulations for presentation tonight. I added a couple slides for local regulations just to help enhance the presentation. So thank you very much to Lake County for putting that program together and providing some of this information to us. Just as a background, possession limits for cannabis within the state of Illinois, this is the amount that you would be able to purchase at a recreational facility. The medical facilities that are currently in place, there's a database. Once you receive your medical card, you are only allowed to purchase from one medical dispensary. That at this point is not the case for the recreational, so there's not going to be a database at this point, so that people, residents, could potentially purchase from multiple dispensaries. So each time they can walk in, 30 grams of flower, 5 grams of concentrate, 500 milligrams of THC contained in a cannabis-infused product, and then medical cannabis patients can self-grow as well. Non-residents, visitors from out of state, basically the limits are half of that. And transportation across state lines is illegal. There are going to be 5 different types of licenses that the state of Illinois is going to be issuing. The main one that we're going to be looking at is the dispensary license. It is regulated by the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. The other 4 licenses are going to be issued by the Illinois Department of Agriculture. So licensing time frame, June of this year, the law was enacted. August, as of right now, applications for early sites are going in. Basically, those are the existing medical cannabis sites are allowed to convert their site to a recreational cannabis if the local zoning allows. And they are also each granted an additional location. So that will result in the 73 or so that I think was indicated earlier. January 1st, those licenses will go live. Next March, the state will start working on issuing the applications for the craft grower, infuser, and transporter. As of May of next year, those 75 licenses are expected to be issued. And in July of next year, they'll be working on issuing licenses for the craft growers, infusers, and transporters. By end of 2021, the state expects to have 110 licenses for operation for dispensaries, as well as 60 licenses for the craft growers, infusers, and transporting organizations. What are ability? Local governments may enact reasonable zoning regulations related to the zoning of cannabis business establishments, such as the time, place, manner, and number of establishments in each community, the minimum distance between cannabis establishments, and locations it deems sensitive. We may also utilize special use permits, but the standards for the special use permits have to be reasonable. We can also do the all-out ban, and the state also contemplates the ability to consume on-site. So the dispensaries may have the ability to allow consumption on-site. Locally, we have the ability to prohibit that if we deem that in the best interest of our community. One of the ways that we can regulate and protect sensitive uses is we can allow buffers from the dispensary location to different areas that we deem sensitive. The Act has buffering requirements built into the Act for advertising, but it does not definitively buffer for the actual dispensary. So for advertising, it's 1,000 feet away from any park, school, daycare, or public property used, or a recreation center or arcade. So no advertising would be allowed within 1,000 feet of any of those entities. We can also add additional buffers to other areas that we deem sensitive, such as residential districts, other smoke shops, other dispensaries, alcohol, any place that has an alcohol license, places of worship, or any type of transitional housing. Those are several examples of other states that have issued those buffers. Currently, our medical marijuana regulations, we allow it, it's contemplated as a special use permit in our C2, C3, C6, I1, I2, and I3 districts. The state of Illinois has a buffer built into that act, 1,000 feet from any educational facility or daycare center. In addition, the village required buffers of 1,000 feet from any forest preserve or state local park and 500 feet from any residential district. Once all those buffers are overlaid on our community map, basically the dark areas in the deep red that shows up on the map are the only areas that would be allowed to apply for a special use for the medical dispensary. This is kind of what we used as the base for discussion for what we want to do with the recreational. As I said, the state statute has fairly specific standards for signage. Brian mentioned this as well, as far as what the signage advertising can show. But they also instituted specific buffers for the advertisement. So signs, billboards would not be allowed within 1,000 feet from the perimeter of any playground, rec center, childcare, park, library, arcades, on any public transportation or on publicly owned property. So while the state statute did not issue buffers for the actual use, they did issue buffers for the advertisement of the use. In theory, a location could go within that buffer if it did not have any signage. Which doesn't, it's kind of counter, but that, that flexibility is left up to the local municipality to institute buffers consistent with the advertising buffers or to other sensitive areas. So that's all I've got at this point.
Okay, there's a lot to think about. Thank you, David. All right, so we have some guests that asked to present tonight. We have from Stevenson High School, Carson Ezel, is that right? And he's got 2 students with him, and they asked to make a presentation tonight. So if you want to come up to the microphone, they have a PowerPoint. And you can tell us a little bit more about your group.
Hi, I'm Carson Ezel. I am a junior at Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire.
And I'm Eleni Angelos. I'm also a junior from Stevenson in Lincolnshire.
So we are from a group called Catalyst. Catalyst is a youth drug prevention organization at Stevenson. And over the past couple of years, one of the things that we have done is advocate against the legalization of marijuana in the state of Illinois. We gathered a lot of research, we talked to a lot of politicians, but unfortunately, this past summer, they decided to move forward with legalization anyway. And based on the research that we gathered, we believe that the next best option is to opt out of recreational marijuana sales in our local communities. So Naperville is one community that is considering an opt-out of recreational marijuana dispensaries, and reasons that they are considering that is because they believe that, first of all, it will threaten the safety of their community. Second, they think it will threaten the family orientation of their community. They believe that they are a very family-friendly community, and they do not believe that a recreational marijuana dispensary aligns with those values. Additionally, Naperville recognizes that it is much easier to opt in and allow a recreational marijuana dispensary to come in later than it is to opt out at a later point if you already have a recreational marijuana dispensary. In addition to Naperville, there are many other communities that have done multiple different things to take a stand against legalization. Morton and Wilmington are two Illinois communities that have opted out of recreational marijuana dispensaries. Grays Lake and Lake Villa have passed a moratorium, which means for now, marijuana dispensaries will not be able to come into their communities. But there's sunset clauses on those, which means that at a further date, they will reconsider whether they want to allow in recreational dispensaries. And then Highland Park, Lake Villa, and Lake Forest are also still considering opting out of recreational dispensaries. And this is not only something that we're seeing in Illinois. In many other states where they have recreational marijuana, most communities ultimately decide to opt out of allowing recreational dispensaries. You could see that in Colorado, Michigan, and California, large majorities of communities have opted out of sales. And the reasons why this is the case vary. Some do it because they know that marijuana is addictive and it is harmful. Others know that when you allow in a dispensary, the presence of that dispensary alone leads to the normalization of marijuana, which increases usage further in that community. They also know that that in turn will decrease the public safety of a community. The illegal market for marijuana still thrives when you have a marijuana dispensary in your community. And they know that, yes, there are tax revenues to be made, but those tax revenues probably aren't what you expect, given that there are also public health expenses that you will have to account for. So one of the benefits of having a recreational marijuana dispensary is definitely the money. That is the main one that communities are considering. But when we take into account money, we also have to take into account public health expenses and potential financial negatives, and we have to consider whether we will really be profitable off of having a recreational dispensary when we take into account the higher usage rates in our community and what that will lead to. We also have to remember that that money goes against the family friendliness and the values of our community. Is that really money that we really want to be bringing in to our government? Is that really business that we want to be bringing in to our village?
Should we shut down taverns, shops?
Sir? Sir, it's not a debate, it's the only.
So if we do let dispensaries in our community, we can see that access, visibility, and social acceptance of marijuana will go up and increase. And in turn, perception of risk and harm will go down because these dispensaries normalize marijuana, and then use rates will go up because people will think it's less dangerous, and in turn, health and safety problems will also increase. So some health and safety issues created by the marijuana legalization is increased use among residents, increased calls to poison control, increased ER visits, increased crime, including violent crime, increased marijuana-related traffic accidents, DUIs, and crashes that resulted in fatalities, injuries, increased illegal markets, and increased school infractions. So some experiences from people who were impacted by cannabis in their town. In November 2017, at least 7 armed robbers attacked a medical marijuana growing facility in Greenleaf Township. That time, 3 people ended up dead, and the FBI got involved. Authorities believe these suspects were hoping to sell the stolen marijuana on the black market, part of a bigger drug ring. And another experience is because marijuana is legal in Washington, it is more readily available to a higher percentage of kids. I know a lot of good, athletic, and academic kids that would never buy marijuana from a drug dealer, but would buy it or ask their older friend to buy it from a dispensary. And both these experiences are not only caused from the legalization of marijuana, but from dispensaries being in these towns. So if we look at cannabis and increased usage, we can see that in the states that marijuana is legalized and the youth usage, it's 7% higher in California, 40% higher in Colorado, 60% higher in Oregon, and 39% higher in Washington. And if we look at the units of edible products sold, it is increasing and it is at a higher percentage. And from this, we can see that when the youth rates go up, and the edible products sold go up, this correlation means that a lot of the youth are getting products that are higher in THC and are more potent and therefore will impair them more. So another chart looking at legalization and youth rates, the youth use in legal states is not only higher but also increasing, but the youth use in non-legal states is lower and decreasing. So the impact of dispensary density among 11th graders, marijuana dispensary density has been linked to more use among youth, with 16% of 11th graders reporting marijuana use in areas with less dispensary density compared to 24.3% of the same group reporting use in more retail dense areas. And also looking at ages 18 to 22, living near more medical marijuana dispensaries is positively associated with more frequent use of marijuana. In both these age groups, the dispensary density has increased the use of marijuana usage. So up here we just have a couple of examples of the products, some edibles, some gummies, and clearly these are colorful products. They're flavored, they're marketed towards kids. These products, they normalize the use of marijuana, and these edibles are also more potent and higher in THC levels, which will impair the youth more. And so then if we look at cannabis and addiction, 9% of marijuana users will become addicted, but 1 in 6, which is about 17% of teens who use marijuana, will become addicted. And if we look at the average THC levels over time, the THC levels in the 90s are way less than the THC levels now. So the marijuana that was in the market and sold in the 90s was way less potent than the marijuana now. So the marijuana that teens are using, that the teens get addicted to, is so much more strong and has a lot more higher levels of THC. So if we look at cannabis and psychosis, teen users report paranoia, anxiety, and hallucinations associated with marijuana use. And in Denver, there were 2,567 ER visits that were attributed to marijuana from 2012 to 2016, and that was more frequently seen with edibles because of these higher THC levels.
I previously mentioned that when we legalize marijuana or allow in a dispensary, it doesn't get rid of the black market. And based on states that have legalized marijuana, that has shown to be true. If you look at California, about 82% of their marijuana sales are still believed to be illegal. So the legal market has not taken a big chunk out of the black market. And you could see that other states reflect similar statistics, where the illegal market is still thriving despite the existence of a legal industry. We also talked about that one of the goals of legalizing marijuana was kind of to allow our police departments not to have to focus on that. But if you look at Denver or states that have legalized marijuana, there are still many incidents related to public display and public consumption of marijuana that law enforcement has to deal with. And if we allow in a recreational marijuana dispensary, it is very likely that our communities will be seeing more public display and public consumption incidents, which will still be illegal, especially around the dispensaries where they are buying the product. I also mentioned that it is much easier to opt back in to allowing a marijuana dispensary later than it is to opt out at a later day after you allow a dispensary in. And the reason for this is because once dispensaries get established in our communities, it is much harder to get rid of them. And the same is true in markets. Once you let an industry get established in a market, it's much harder to regulate that industry. If you look at Washington State, they attempted to discontinue gummies and candies that were infused with marijuana because of the effects on children. But they were met with fierce opposition from the marijuana industry because it was already very well established in their state. I don't think this is something that we want to be dealing with in our communities. We want to maintain control for as long as we can over how marijuana is regulated within Gurnee. The tax revenues that we can expect and the profit that we can expect to make as communities are also very uncertain. We don't know exactly how many sales a dispensary will make, but we do know that based on a 3% excise tax, $1 million sold in marijuana will result in $30,000 in tax revenue. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is it really worth selling $1 million of marijuana in order to collect $30,000 in tax revenue? And I don't think that's worth it. Another thing we have to consider is the cost to society and the public health incidents that arise because of that, such as an increase in crime, increase in drug driving, and higher workplace costs. So when marijuana legalization was being debated, our group prepared a cost study that kind of compared the revenues to the expenses. And we found that against the projected revenues, when you put together the public costs of increased drug driving, workplace absenteeism and injuries, regulatory costs, increased ER visits and hospitalizations, you see that the industry is not profitable for our communities. I believe that a recreational marijuana dispensary, based on the increased local usage that we would see because of that, would mean that that would not be a profitable move for our communities to take when you account for public health interests. And if you look at the alcohol and tobacco industries, what we see is that societal costs greatly outweigh money that we make. For every $1 raised from alcohol and tobacco taxation, our governments at all levels spend about $10 in public health expenses. And Colorado, when it comes to marijuana, is seeing the same thing. For every $1 they gain in tax revenue, Coloradoans spend about $4.50 to mitigate the effects on public health following legalization. We believe that the best option for our communities to take is to opt out of allowing recreational marijuana dispensaries, but there are also alternate policy solutions that we would like to propose, starting with a moratorium, which means not allowing a dispensary in for now to reconsider at a later date with a sunset clause like Grays Lake did. You could also only allow existing medical marijuana dispensaries to gain a recreational license. That wouldn't necessarily be as relevant to Gurnee because there is not a medical marijuana dispensary. You could limit recreational marijuana dispensaries to industrial zones, and what that does is it keeps the presence of the dispensary out of the day-to-day life of children and everyone in our communities, and that kind of limits the effect of their advertising and normalization of marijuana, helping to kind of keep up the perception of risk. You can also allow a maximum of only one marijuana dispensary in your community, and you can impose strict limitations such as the hours of operation of a marijuana dispensary. We still believe that the best option to limit the impact of marijuana legalization on our communities is to opt out of marijuana dispensaries. We believe that this will send a message to our community, our youth and young adults, that we do not promote getting high as a form of recreation. And we believe that this is an opportunity to put people over profits. Regardless of whether or not we will make money, I believe that we should put public health before any potential revenue that we might make from this industry. We have an opportunity to opt out of retail marijuana sales in Gurnee, and I believe that we should move forward with that. Could we do questions at this time, or should we do that later on, if there are any?
We got one more presentation, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the board. So
Okay.
if you can hang on for a little bit more. Excellent job, though. So we have another perspective, to be fair, and help the board. Paul Gillum is a business entity with dispensaries in other states, correct? Or you can fill us in on your background.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Paul Gilman, and I represent a national cannabis business known as Arise, A-E-R-I-Z. Arise has operations in Southern Illinois, California, and Arizona. And Illinois has this unique opportunity to expand their medical cannabis program to recreational. As you can see, I brought a copy of the act, and the regulations are going to come out in October, and they're probably going to dwarf this, and it's going to be probably 4 or 5 times this with the regulations. So as was noted before, we're now expanding the medical cannabis program to include recreational cannabis. There's going to be approximately 200 dispensaries throughout the state of Illinois by the 2021 date. The first phase is going to be the 73 dispensaries. They're going to move to 110 dispensaries. But Illinois has probably the strictest regulations in the country right now. As being the latest of the recreational adopters, Illinois has adopted strict standards in terms of advertising, facility design, security. Very detailed plans are required in order to get a license in Illinois for both growing and dispensing. So we expect that to continue. In communities where medical cannabis is operating, medical cannabis dispensaries are operating, a lot of times they just meld into the communities. You don't know that that's what's there. The advertising is understated. They're very discreet. They don't want to stand out and draw a lot of attention to themselves. And the dispensaries and the recreational are going to fit into the communities. They're not going to be the kind of businesses that you might expect normally that would go with the dispensing operations. They're going to be very tactful. As noted, communities now have the opportunity to opt out. And you have 1 year from the date of the act to do your opt-out. And if you fail to do that, if you want to opt out later, it's going to take a lot more to do that. It's not going to be as easy to do that. So we encourage municipalities and villages like Gurnee to not opt out now. Let the process unfold and go along with the trend. Although our plans are still being developed, Arise is going to be designing an 8,000 square foot standalone facility that they hope to be able to present to the village sometime for approval. It's going to presumably be a standalone facility that again will fit within the community. Arise hopes to be a valuable part of the community. At full operation, they expect the facility will have between 20 and 30 employees. And it was noted there is an economic impact to having recreational cannabis in the community. Studies have shown that there's a 3.5 times return. So for every dollar of cannabis that's sold, you can expect the community to have about another $2.50 of benefit between the employees and other expenses. Your property taxes are presumably you're going to increase property tax revenues. It's going to increase the values. The village is going to be able to assess an additional excise tax of up to 3%, in addition to the other sales tax revenue you'll have. So there is an economic impact to the community to have this, and there's also an impact in having additional jobs in the community. As noted, the cannabis, like with the medical cannabis, there's strict packaging standards too, and there's advertising restrictions on where you can advertise, and Illinois is very concerned about keeping the advertisement away from people under 21. And so there's limits on, and as we noted before, the buffers on where you can put billboards and how you can advertise. And so we expect Illinois to be very diligent in policing that. And the goal is to keep cannabis away from those under age 21. So we expect that, similar to the medical cannabis, which has now grown. The industry, it took a while for the industry to reach some maturity level, and as of late, there's just under 50,000 patients that are enjoying it. And part of that was with the new administration increasing the conditions to which medical cannabis would apply. The prior administration was very limiting in terms of the patient population. And so now we're seeing the industry in Illinois start to mature, the medical cannabis industry start to mature. And so as a result, the state and local revenues are starting to increase based on that as well. And facilities are starting to expand. And so again, we're seeing an industry that is now starting to take hold in Illinois. And recreational cannabis is here to stay in Illinois. It's going to be in other communities. If it's not in Gurnee with the facilities, it's going to be in other communities. And some of the economic benefits will then inure to some of the neighboring communities. And you're still going to have some of the costs. If you have public safety costs, people who are intent on driving under the influence are going to drive through all communities. They're not just going to limit it in the community where they bought the cannabis. You're going to still have those public safety. So that's really a statewide issue as much as it is a local issue. So as I said, as Illinois, develops their regulations, we expect the municipalities to have some sort of a follow-on regulation if they don't opt out to accommodate recreational cannabis, presumably in the community. And we look forward to working with the village, answering any questions as our plans develop. And hopefully Gurnee is going to be a welcoming place.
Thank you very much. Before I open the floor to the public to make comment on the marijuana legalization, I'll let the trustees ask questions of any of our presenters. So you could ask a question of Brian, Sean, David, Carson, or Paul, if you have any questions. Trustee Balmas?
First, Brian, I just, when you had talked about the dispensaries, 73 at the end of 2020 and then 110, is that 110 additional to the 73, or is that including the 73? So would it be like 183 at the end?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an increased number. Those are additional.
So they are additional more. Okay. And
Paul or
no,
Carson?
No.
Sean?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my God, how embarrassing. Yes. My question, have we looked at the areas that have had the legalized marijuana? Have they experienced any increases? They have the dispensaries. Have they had any increases? Do you know, like Mundelein, Buffalo Grove?
The statistics, as far as I'm concerned, have not come out yet. But in discussions with those communities, I mean, they, at least from a law enforcement standpoint, are seeing more active calls in those towns based on marijuana-based calls. So it's something that tends to be growing, but again, there's no hard evidence or statistics on those numbers yet.
Okay. And just to one more quickie, to our young people, you've made your presentation to Lincolnshire. I see that they're still up in the air, but you've made your presentation and you haven't been able to help them make that decision yet, even in Lincolnshire, where Stevenson covers?
Yeah, so we've actually presented to numerous places. In addition to Lincolnshire, we've presented to Vernon Hills, who we were actually more optimistic about. We've presented to Arlington Heights, so we've presented all over, and we believe that some of those will turn into opt-outs.
And have you extended your catalyst? Has Warren, your organization, have you been able to increase in other high schools? Have you got other involvement in other schools?
Yes, we're actually, we work closely, even on this issue, with a variety of other high schools. I don't know about Warren specifically. I believe they do have a coalition. But we work with Mundelein. We work with the Deerfield Highland Park group, so we kind of coordinated with them. And we saw that Highland Park is actually considering opting out. So we work closely with them on that. But yes, like we are communicating with other high schools working on the same task.
Okay, thank you. That's mine.
Trustee Hood?
Brian, could you walk us through what opting in looks like and then opting out, or the opposite, opting out? Just kind of describing how it's difficult to opt out once you've opted in. So what's the process we'd actually follow to do that?
Well, I mean, opt-out is very, the Illinois Municipal League has proposed a model opt-out ordinance. It's very simple. Prohibit it. And it would be very similar to what the village did with video gaming. So that's very clear. The alternative is to allow for it with regulations. And again, the Illinois Municipal League has provided a draft version of a model ordinance that could be considered, and that's something that staff would have to look at. And as Mr. Ziegler pointed out, probably the village would take the approach similar to what it did with medical dispensaries, that there'd be buffers 1,000 feet from sensitive areas, or at least 500 feet, and in certain zoning classifications. In terms of the moratorium, I did hear that discussed. I'm not a big advocate of moratoriums because the law does try to narrowly confine them to short periods of time. And so that would not be an approach that I would favor from a legal standpoint, because it leaves some ambiguity as to what the village is going to do in the future, and then making sure that it acts timely. And so I think the two approaches really should be opt-out, at which time you can always reevaluate coming back in, or legislate that it's going to be a special use in certain zoning classifications.
What's the process of doing the opt-in? So we opt out, and then we come and we decide a year later to opt back in. Is it difficult to do, or?
No, if you opt out, all you have to do is rescind that ordinance, and you could provide for it. So at that point, under like any zoning provision, it's assumed that it isn't permitted unless your ordinance allows for it, and so that would be very easy. If you opt in and wanted to opt out later, that would be very difficult, because now the property owner or the business owners have vested property rights. That's very difficult and would not be an approach that I would be recommending to the board. Very difficult to do.
And I believe after a year, it requires referendum
Right.
to opt back
Yes.
out after a year.
And they do. They have some other procedural hurdles which would be very difficult. I don't think that that's an easy option at all.
Thank you.
Before I go back to Jeannie, questions here, or you can wait? Trustee Thorstensen?
Yeah, mine's taking a different path, though, so did Jeannie want to follow on?
Okay, Jeannie.
I just, David, on your map of where it would be allowed, I couldn't quite, where that dark area was, where specifically is that at?
So
That
the
would
areas
be
that you're looking at is basically between Delaney and Northwestern in the northeast area of town. So the industrial zoned areas up in that area. We've got a little pocket in the southeast corner along Washington Street, east of Route 41 and a little bit west of Route 41. We've got Gurnee Mills area and the outlots in front of Gurnee Mills, as well as the Menards complex on the south side. And then we also have Northridge Plaza between the Tollway and Great America, where like Olive Garden and the vacant Joe's Crab Shack in those areas, would be the current regulation that we've got in place right now for medical.
Too close to residential?
That's enacting it'd just be the ones that are fronting Grand Avenue.
Oh, okay.
We had a 500-foot buffer from residential, and I can zoom in a little bit. So once we place the 500-foot buffer, you can see those outlots right up along
okay.
Grand Avenue are in excess of 500 feet away from the residentially zoned properties. Now, all of those would still require a special use permit, so we would have another opportunity to evaluate each site on a site-by-site basis to make sure that there are no exceptional impacts that would be negatively impacting the neighboring properties. So we do have a limited review of those at that time, But these were the areas that were contemplated to be allowed for the medical.
Just medical?
This is just the medical evaluation that we approved about 5 years ago.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry.
All right, Trustee Thorstensen?
So I'm just not going to try to remember everybody's names, but thank you very much. I feel like I'm quite more informed after your fantastic presentations. I did hear something on the radio news today, and I just want to get it out here because I'm sure that we're learning everything so quickly, but an organization called phys.org, PHYS.org, like physicians, just hit the news wire from Friday saying that there's potential for chocolate interfering with the potency testing. And so I'm just hesitant. I didn't hear that tonight. I don't know if the health department or anybody else is going to weigh into that variable, but it does make me concerned that even with everything I've heard, we haven't heard about how it ingests differently with all these other chemicals aspects. So I don't know if anybody heard or read anything further on that, I don't know if Sean, if you've seen anything like that. No, I don't have any information on that. So it certainly was a concern to me that there's a lot of more unknowns, I think, from a chemistry perspective.
And at your place, there is some information from a behavioral health group that was unable to make it tonight, but did send what their presentation would be, just some additional information, about the effects of marijuana and the social costs and ER visits and that. So it may be in there too. Okay, Trustee Garner?
Yes, if we are, Brian, maybe you can answer this question. First of all, are there dispensaries that only dispense medical versus medical and recreational?
Well, not yet, because we just have medical right now.
Okay.
I think the thought is that most places would want to sell both. Now, there's been some discussions that they might have separate entrances so that they can differentiate because, as Mr. Ziegler pointed out, if you have a medical prescription, you have to go to the one dispensary identified with your prescription. And they are going to keep track of that versus recreational, which is going to cost more, but also, they're not reporting who the purchaser is. They're going to ask for identification, but they're not going to record your identity when you purchase that item.
So more clearly, if we opt in, if we are to opt in for dispensaries and we have a dispensary that does medical marijuana, do we have to also sell recreational, and how does that work? I mean,
well, so currently we would allow a medical dispensary. We have not been approached because there's a limited number of dispensaries. They don't want to locate close to each other. It seems to be unlikely that too many exclusively medical dispensaries will exist now that there is recreational. Time will tell, but you can imagine they're going to have, all the infrastructure to sell this product, and chances are they're going to have both at the same location.
And whose decision is that? Do we get to?
Well, no. So basically, we allow medical. If we opt out, then there would be no recreational.
But if we opt in on medical, there will be.
We already opted in on medical 5 years ago.
We had no
so
choice.
We allow it
there was
today.
no opt-out.
So we're opting in for recreational?
Yes, that's what we're debating.
And actually, we will, by default, be part of it unless we opt out. So we have to opt out. Otherwise, it's going to be just like medical. You're going to have to permit it.
So this is a very difficult conversation for me because I spent the last 30 years teaching my children not to do drugs. And now I'm sitting here and, as a leader of this community, one of the leaders of this community, and I find it very difficult to not feel like I'm going to turn us all into drug dealers. I mean, just to put it bluntly, for dollars. And I'm sitting here, and these young people, I'm so proud of you for coming in because you're begging the adults not to do it. So in my mind, something's wrong here. Something's really wrong here. It done went sideways. And we're about to make a mess. And all across this country. And, you know, alcohol went bad, okay? And now we're about to throw another layer of bad on top of it. And I'm all for medical marijuana. I've been a drug rep for 30 years, and I know all about the medicinal purposes and all that. I'm all for that. But are we crazy? So, this is a warped conversation that we're having. And I just want to make that point that I'm struggling with this.
Well, it's a tough decision, but we need to do, as Brian said, if we do nothing, then it just comes in, and we have no buffering and no restriction on zoning. So the state kind of took some of the decision away from us, as much as many of us don't like. I mean, listening to the young people, I thought that's the same argument I constantly have in my head with liquor licenses. You know, we are, is it representative of our community and what we want to be teaching our children? So if we do nothing, the state's already kind of taken it out of our hands. So staff's looking for some direction on how much time and effort and resources we invest in, which path do we want to take. And you just brought it, we could do nothing, but that really opens us up to what I think none of us want, which is they could go anywhere. So it's kind of opt out, or if the board thinks there's some value, treat it like we did medical or some other combination. But I think we need to hear from the residents too, and we have some other business owners here. So why don't I open the floor to residents? So we just need your name, and you need to be at the microphone. It's all yours.
Okay. Good evening. Tim Garrity, 1535 U Court in Gurnee, resident. Start off, I have a prepared statement as well, but I want to give kudos to the two young people and to our officer. Very, very good presentation and impactful, and I'm glad that you guys all listened. So I'm going to speak in favor of opting out. So again, it's written, families from all over the Midwest and further come to Gurnee to shop, dine, visit our attractions. The brand that Gurnee has developed over the last 20, 30, 40 years is being a safe and family-friendly place to visit. Opting in for recreational marijuana dispensaries in the village would change the tourist dynamic and our long-cultivated family-friendly branding of the village. I worry about cannabis tourism coming to Gurnee, where visitors mix their Six Flags visit with the purchase of marijuana in the village, and then our visitors driving around our streets impaired. The scenario would further stress our police department. We have to consider that any revenue gained by the village in marijuana taxes can be offset by increased costs of law enforcement or other social issues that pop up. I heard it from both presentations tonight. I see selling marijuana in the village is not in sync with our family destination branding. We must consider other destinations. When we think of Lake Buena Vista, Florida, for example, Disney, we think of the Disney resorts, their shopping, their entertainment. We don't think of Disney complexes of having adult-oriented marijuana as a side business. It runs against the branding of Disney. We need to consider, why would we risk our reputation as a family-friendly destination and make decisions that run counter to our long-evolved branding of the village? We also need to ask, are we being good partners with Great America and Great Wolf Lodge, who will now have more folks showing up at their doors with marijuana in their possession, or at least in their systems? We need to consider the future family tourists sitting on the deck at Great Wolf Lodge outside with their small children. So what if they have someone that is smoking marijuana from the deck below? What do we think their review on TripAdvisor will say about Gurnee and their experience here, and about Great Wolf Lodge? Have we done them any favors? No. We must consider that these tourists may decide it's better to drive to Six Flags St. Louis or to the Great Wolf at the Wisconsin Dells, where they don't have to worry about marijuana tourism. So while I have no problem with people smoking in their own homes here in Gurnee, but by opting in to allow dispensaries here in the village itself, we need to consider the potential damage to our town in terms of reputation, impaired tourists on our roads, and increased costs to the Gurnee brand. So I strongly urge an opt-out for all of our families and for our town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Olson. I had several emails, not several, but I did have email communication with Donna Dallas, and she had informed me that I would have a 10-minute time slot to demonstrate what we wanted to do. And I was pretty surprised to see that I was not on the docket this morning.
I'm sorry, which group are you representing?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, which group are you representing, or?
All Good, LLC.
Okay, that may be Donna's my admin, so if I was supposed to include you, I apologize. I certainly want to make sure you have your time.
Oh, thank you. Would it be okay if I took this moment now to?
Sure, if everybody, yeah, if everybody could just sit for a minute and we'll let the gentleman have his, yes.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Again, I'm a Lake County resident. I have lived in Lake County my entire life, and I have a team of individuals put together that want to open a recreational cannabis facility here in Gurnee. Some of you may know him. Some of you may know one of my partners. His name's Corey Groupie. He is an executive chef of one of the restaurants here in town. And he is actually speaking on our behalf in Libertyville right now, and Libertyville's having this exact same meeting, so we had to divide our team up in order to make sure we're represented at both cities here. There are several, I can hear a lot of opposition here from people, and what it sounds like is that there's a lot of unknowns. And that's something we want to help change, is to change the perception of what recreational cannabis is and how it's to be used, and to help enforce the laws. I have a family myself, and my wife over here, Jennifer, is part of the team. And we have children who we do not want to see these products get in their hands, and we are going to make certain that it does not. On the other side of the coin, to address concerns about safety and security of how businesses are going to run, this bill is now providing a means for officers to work and find and actually test individuals on location, whereas there was not before. So there's going to be a natural increase of DUIs, yes, because now there's a means for us to find these individuals. And if anybody thinks that marijuana is not here, is sadly mistaken. It is here right now. It will just be now regulated, and now this bill is providing a means for regulation of that. And the company that we have put together is looking forward to working with the cities. We have a strong investment in our communities, and we'll be providing to the communities in which we do business. And like I said, we are Illinois residents and have been our entire lives. There are companies that are coming in out of state that I want you to think of where that money is going to go for the companies that are coming out of state to come in here to buy up the cannabis dispensaries. The money should stay here in Illinois with Illinois residents owning these companies and providing the guidance and the knowledge that we need to, as a community, make this work. And I have a representative here of Embassy Security that would like to speak to what he has worked on and how security would be established within our business.
President and co-owner of Embassy Security Group. We're located in Illinois, New York, California, and Minnesota. In Illinois, we've done approximately 15 security plans for medical marijuana. We currently have 2 medical marijuana facilities that we are at 24 hours a day. They are both dispensaries. Our security plans are extremely sophisticated. My partner spent 30 years in the Army, and he was a property inspector. All he did was inspect buildings and armories for issues with alarms and things like that. We have our exterior patrols will have lighted cameras that are humidified. They never go blurry, they never get wet. We put everything up into a cloud. We give state police access to that cloud that they can look at a camera at a facility anytime. Our interior designs are strictly off blueprints. We do a blueprint of the facility. We show where we want contact alarms, where we want push button alarms, where we want fingerprint sensors for inside the storage rooms, so nobody can get in a storage room if they don't have a fingerprint or ID. We're very, very conscious about exterior security with people in the village. We don't want to put any more problems on the police department to have to respond to alarms or any of that stuff. Everything outside is motion detected and will go to our command center telling us if something's wrong and where it is. Our normal security service for officers in these places that we've done prior is 1 person on an exterior patrol, 1 person inside 24 hours a day. And I can only assume that they're going to have the same type of requirements as they did for medical marijuana. We have a I don't want to call it a sally port, but it's like a sally port. It's an interior door, an exterior door. Client, the customer comes into the door. The security guard at the desk takes his IDs, punches it into the computer. Computer tells him, yes, they're eligible to buy. They can do this at this point in time. He buzzes them into the property, and then they go do their thing. If the card is revoked or the guy's got a warrant, we'll know that right away, and we won't allow them to sell. We'll call Gurnee to come pick them up. We will reject them if they're rejected by the state police computer. We won't let them buy. We'll just send them on their way. If anybody's got a question, I'm happy to answer it. Our plans are normally about, the other gentleman showed you a packet. Our plans for the smallest facility we did a plan for, which was up in Rockford, was 425 pages. And that gave the property plans, the security plans, the money transport plans, and all of that. Anything else, Jeff?
No, I think you've covered pretty much all of what we plan to do with the security. Thank you very much for that. Again, I'd just like to reiterate that we have a vested interest in our communities, and educating the users on how to use the product and the laws is one of our goals, and to change the perception of what this is. Currently, the black market, I'd like everybody to know that the black market, you purchase a baggie of marijuana, you don't really know what you're getting. You come into a dispensary, and we can educate you on what exactly it is you're getting, what you're supposed to do with it, how you're supposed to use it. It's going to be coming from a reputable source. You're going to be getting something that it has been regulated, and people will know what they're getting into.
That would be organic.
Yes, it will be all organic. Yeah. If there are any questions no, yeah, no. Well, actually, so we would just be a dispensary. We would not be growing because there. The source of what, yeah, you're only able to purchase within the state of Illinois. So all of our products will be coming from within Illinois providers.
Thank you very much. And again, I apologize. I know Donna had said it, are other people allowed to make presentations? And I told her we'd, yes, and we would give people 10 minutes. I don't remember getting, and I may have missed it, this is on me, confirmation that you wanted to speak. So again, I apologize. If you have any material that you'd like to leave, we'd make sure it's distributed to the board.
Okay, yes. Well, apology accepted, and thank you very much for actually allowing me to speak, and thank you very much for your time.
All right, good, thank you. All right, yes. We'll continue with the resident comments.
Okay. You might know me, I'm Kim Callahan. My son is John Callahan, who died of neuroblastoma. He was 11. Okay? I played hard. I worked at Jewel. I jumped on a shopping cart because I got day hours. The cart went down, the cart went up, and I almost lost my eye. But I herniated my disc, and I went to work. I drove myself to Lake Forest Hospital where I worked, but I was in Waukegan, Jewel, Sunset and Lewis. It's closed now. I was on the desk calling the police officers more than I was doing my job. I had 3 kids, so I worked 5 to 1 in the morning. My husband worked days because we couldn't afford daycare. Okay? I did the opioids. I did the cannabis. I went through the legal system. I did it the right way. But I'm telling you right now, I have migraines nobody can fix, and I have neuropathy because when my son died, went sledding and bulged a disc, and I bulged it so hard that I have neuropathy, and they will not be able to fix that. I'm 58 years old. Okay? 58. I've had a son in the Air Force that went to Iraq. I had a son die of cancer. I had a 30-year-old son who lost his brother. And I'm done. I'm done. I want people to quit driving drunk, quit driving high, and I don't want any more police officers to have to do any more work than they have to because they have to do their jobs. And I've been in Lake County for a long time. I lived in Round Lake. Haynesville, I went to school at. I've seen Round Lake change. My son worked for CENTCOM after the Air Force. Then he went to Foxconn. No, Foxconn first, then CENTCOM. Okay? But I have to go to bed now because I am in so much pain that there is nobody that can help me with my migraines or my neuropathy. Okay? So is there any questions for me?
No, sir, the questions are from us. So Kim, you're opposed to us allowing recreational
I am
dispensaries.
opposed to making more work for our police officers that have enough work to do, doing their job. Okay? I'm opposed. I've seen more accidents driving because my mother is sick, and I mean really sick. I'm so opposed. There's not enough hospitals to take care of everybody. There's not enough ERs in the area of Lake County. I've been in more hospitals than you can imagine. I've had 2 spinal surgeries at Northwestern, and now nobody knows what to do with me because they can't help me. Because I jumped on a shopping cart. My son died. I went sledding. It was cold. But I did it because he asked me. He was 7. His brother he was maybe 8. He died in 97. Okay? So I don't know what you guys want to do, because that's not my job, that's your job. I watch 60 Minutes with my husband, and just watch that show. Okay, but I got to go to bed now, because I am in so much pain that I have to take gabapentin for nerve pain.
Well, thank you for coming tonight and speaking. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and God bless all of you guys.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm Paul Bunnell. I've been a resident of Gurnee for over 30 years now. And a few questions first. Mayor, you mentioned that if we don't opt out, that the regulations, this is a question actually for Brian, do the regulations regarding spacing, 1,000-foot buffers and everything else, they still apply in September if we don't opt out?
Well, the state really doesn't have much in the way of buffering. So my advice would be we have to address this issue, either opt out or come up with a comprehensive response that would allow this to be a special use within the village. Those really, I mean, from a practical standpoint, those are the two options.
Okay.
You could put a moratorium. I mean, I'm not discounting that. You know, that's postponing perhaps an ultimate decision. But if you opt out now, you can change, you know, that decision later on, which in effect would be serving as a moratorium.
Thank you, Brian. Mayor, I have a couple other questions if I could continue. First for Officer Sean. All of the training that you mentioned that's going to take place, or would need to take place, aren't you going to have to do all of that anyway with every single village around here? And we have to be real about what's happening here. Gurnee is not sitting in some isolated pinnacle where if we don't opt in, we'll never see marijuana in Gurnee.
No,
That's
you're
not
you're
gonna
at,
happen.
you're 100% correct.
So everything that you're talking about is going to need to be done to train your officers because the state has allowed this to go on. So it's an expense that we're going to incur regardless of whether we opt in or out.
Correct.
So that's the reality of what I think the board has to consider. We're not sitting here in isolation, whether it's Beach Park, Waukegan, Roundout, wherever. These places are going to allow recreational marijuana. As the gentleman said, I'd like to keep the revenues, whatever potentials that they are, here in Gurnee for Gurnee residents, and that to be considered. To Mr. Garner, do you teach your children also to avoid alcohol?
I
As
do.
you said that you don't want them to be druggies and to use drugs. Would you prevent them from going to a bar and having a drink when they're at an appropriate age?
Obviously, it's their choice. However, I did teach my kids not to. It would be better not
Okay?
to.
But what we need here throughout the village and everywhere is education about the fact that this reaper concept of marijuana comes from nowhere. There are no medical facts that bring this up. If you want to look at one simple fact about the safety of marijuana relative to alcohol, okay, the toxicity, the common way of looking at toxicity is to look at an LD50. That's a medical term or a safety term that you'd find on your medical safety data sheets throughout the village. Engineers would know about stuff like that. The safety limit for alcohol is 7 grams per kilogram of body weight. There is no LD50 for THC and marijuana. In the 1970s, I was actually part of people who did studies to prove this stuff. You could smoke 1,000, 10,000 joints a day and not reach a toxic level of THC in comparison to having 13 drinks of alcohol can kill you. So I want you to just, people have to learn that there is not this aura around marijuana of toxicity, of danger anymore. It's in fact significantly less than alcohol. And all tribute to the young kids that are here, the young students that are here, but their statistics don't cover the appropriate way to look at things. They should do, if you want to look at things like this, you have to do it in comparison to what the reality is of the situation. That's in comparison to alcohol, which all of us would accept, okay? Their statistics don't cover certain things. They're showing decreases of 0.1% and claiming that's a decrease. It's within standard errors. Those are the things that are just arguments that need to be considered for your presentations. You should be aware of things like that. I'm a proponent of marijuana for its, its health benefits for those who need it, for the village, because we are not going to be in isolation here. We are going to be surrounded by villages, towns, cities that are going to allow it. All of your enforcement regulations, all of your training for all of your officers is still going to have to take place. Those are facts that we have to face. And so I think we should be moving forward now so that we can get the regulations we need to make it fit into the village as you see fit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marcia. I'm a business owner here in Gurnee. And I came in with a couple notes, and now I have a bunch, so I'll try to skirt my way around everything and be brief. But I think, obviously, cannabis is a strong long-term source of revenue, and it's going to happen whether it's here in Gurnee or in the neighboring areas like we've talked about. People will go shopping elsewhere, so I think you want to think about keeping them and their local dollars here. There are people everywhere, Naperville, Gurnee, Lincolnshire, everywhere that smoke, and I think that it's important to find a safe, secure, legal place for them to do that. I mean, and I guess I would encourage you to really poll your community, your residents, and not just do a vote, you know, for the people who come here or as a board alone, but maybe do a referendum, like somehow reach out to them to actually hear from each person on what they want for their community. So in my opinion, I think the key to success is creating a safe place, and I think that would involve having the right leadership in these dispensaries or dispensary or however many there are. People who will put in measures that address these concerns, that are law-abiding, and that will also have an open line of communication to the community, to the board, and that it is an active, you know, relationship, and that it's not going to happen in a bubble. I think cannabis is here. The tourists are going to partake, whether they buy it here or buy it somewhere else and come in. So I think it's going to be here, so to deal with it, control it, and keep it on that local level, I think is something that's important to consider. I think safety is to have a good business that provides the right security, vets their staff and employees, follows the law, manages their inventory, and that sort of thing. I know that you guys spoke a lot of your stats dealt with young people, and I always get really confused about that because we're talking about adults here. We're talking about people who are 21 and over. I don't know who was speaking about that. I went into a dispensary in Las Vegas just because I was curious about what they look like. I'm not a smoker. But I mean, it was tough to get in there. You had to enter this one room and you had to be ID'd, and they, you know, you stood in that room for 5 or 6 minutes while they vetted you. It wasn't, I don't imagine how a minor would even be able to get in there. So I think that kind of confuses the issue, and it's an emotional thing to bring like all these stats about kids and young people, but it's important to know that we're talking about adults who live here. And I think it's important to provide for them a safe, secure, proper way to go about and recreate in a way that they choose to do so. I also had a note about the police force is going to have to learn this stuff anyway. I think the key there is to benefit and learn from all of these communities who kind of jumped in on the beginning and maybe overindulged. And I mean, I wouldn't want to live and be in Denver and have Gurnee look like Denver. I mean, you can control it. There's all sorts of parameters in terms of where and how many and who. And so there is a way to sort of balance that out, I think. And the police force is going to have to deal with people on these levels anyway. And then I think the only other point I had that I would ask you to consider is the opt-in later, because I think that has the sense of buying time, which it does. But at the same time, you could miss the boat on that because there's only so many licenses that are going to be available. And so if you opt out and then a year later you want to opt back in, that party might be over, right? And so if it is something that you really are interested in, I would try to, I guess, not delay that a year and potentially miss that boat. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. And since Marcia brought it up, we do have a survey online, a Survey Monkey. It's 5 simple questions on our website, gurnee.il.us/something to get to the recreational marijuana.
Recreational cannabis.
/recreational cannabis. So I know we have it on our Facebook page. I have it on my Facebook page. It's on the village's website. So we are encouraging our residents to let us know, opt in, opt out. If we're opting in, is there certain areas of the community, or there certain types of dispensaries, because there's like 5 different things. So it's very short and quick, but we are looking for input from our residents, besides taking comments and besides encouraging the public to come here tonight and comment too. So we're trying to get a feel for, and we had 112 responses just from having it over the weekend without a whole lot of publicity, so.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think that that's great, but I think sometimes people don't even know what's out there, you know? I mean, I don't know how the most effective tool that you all have for communicating things to your community, but I think it's good to have it up there, but how do you let people know that it's, like, how does the whole community know, hey, here's where your voice can be heard on this issue?
That's hard. Believe me, we struggle with that every day on thousands of issues.
And then people are always like, what? Oh, I didn't even know, you know? So.
Yeah, so we're trying to get the word out,
That's
so.
good. Thanks.
Yeah.
My name is Pete Drupnevsky. I've been a resident of Gurnee since 2005. I've spent several years, especially in the last 5 years, of traveling and spending time in Washington State, Denver, Colorado, and I brought my children to this community originally to have a family with family values, and our community shows family values. To me, marijuana, I'm for opt-out, for the simple reason is, number one, my kids, my community. I know the tax dollars can be extremely enticing to our community, but our community's budget is not in need of the tax dollars. We've had a strict, good budget for several years, so using that money wouldn't benefit us a whole lot. It would cause more problems in the long run. True, law enforcement still has to learn how to deal with the problem. That's given. But it's going to raise our crime rates. It's going to raise accidents in our community. As the mayor said, yeah, but it's still going to come into our community. Yes, but if we sell a product and nobody else in the area decides to sell that product, a whole lot less of that product is in our area and a less traffic of it coming through our areas. I have no problem with recreational use. People are free to do what they want in their homes. But now I'm going to have to deal with my children in the neighborhoods going, what's that, Dad? Oh, that's marijuana. It's drugs. It's not good, just like I do with alcohol and cigarettes and vaping and things like that. Death rates with auto accidents have gone up in every single state that has turned around and legalized it. If other neighborhoods keep it out of their neighborhoods, less traffic comes through, equals less accidents, less dead people in our community. I'm not for it. We don't need the tax dollars. People can go to other communities to get it, and that is how I feel. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.
I wasn't planning to speak tonight, so I'm not feeling very prepared. My name is Jenny Selly. I'm a registered nurse and a certified alcohol and drug counselor. I work for Lake County Health Department, but I'm speaking as a resident. I strongly believe you need to opt out. I feel very educated about marijuana, but I don't feel like no disrespect intended, I feel like you have a lot to learn before you make such a big decision. And if we opt out, that would give all of us citizens and the village board time to learn more. And I'm sorry that I feel unprepared, but I felt I needed to say that.
No, those are great words. Thank you.
Norm Bellier, lived in Gurnee since '73. As a former teacher, I want to commend, I wish I had students at Warren like you are. I have a question, first of all, for Mr. Gilman, and that is, it used to be that, I know in Colorado that was a problem of dispensaries because they could not use banks. Federal law prohibits money coming from sellers of drugs. Is that true yet today?
It's still an issue. There have been some state charter banks in various states that have allowed transactions, and so it's still a challenge. There's some legislation pending in Congress to straighten that out, even though they're not going to take cannabis off of a Schedule I right now. So there are some systems that work there. State chartered credit unions as well. Banking is limited, but there's still some banking available.
Because I know you said, it's been said crime increased. Well, the biggest crime that increased was the robbery of dispensaries, because that's where the money was. They couldn't get rid of it. The other thing for Sean, and that is the policing of the dispensaries. Is that going to be similar to what you do for sellers of tobacco and alcohol? You know, send your police cadets or whatever into and try to buy?
At this time, I don't know. That hasn't been discussed.
Does the village board have any consideration of continuing that policy?
Well, we do that with tobacco and alcohol. That'd be a discussion that we would have with the police chief and Sean to get a recommendation for how best they think they can
Okay, all right.
inspect what they expect is basically what it
Okay,
is.
but she said, for example, and somebody else has reiterated, that you would have to retrain your police officers. We're talking about all the money, thousands of dollars that are going to be coming in. What would be the cost of retraining every officer in the department? Any estimate?
In informal discussions with Chief Smith, I think he estimated it, just one training class was like $8,000.
I'm sorry?
$8,000, and it's not a one-time thing.
Per officer?
Yeah, Jesse, our deputy chief. I hate to put you on the spot. I know we had this conversation about the cost of training.
I'm not 100% on the figures, Mayor, but it is a substantial amount of dollars for one officer to be trained as a drug recognition expert.
Which we're going to need to do.
Which we're going to have.
Okay, because it seems like the costs are outweighing the benefits of income.
Right, but we're still going to have to train, and that's something we'll discuss during the budget process.
And if I had a conclusion of what to do, I would go with Mr. Winter and probably recommend a special use permit. I think it gives the safest thing for Gurnee. But I do oppose dispensary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm a little short. My name's Lydia Motovar. I'm a resident of Gurnee in Illinois for over 30 years. So my question, I thought I heard you say for the medical dispensary, you already opt in as a Gurnee?
Yes. We had no choice.
Right, so if we opt out now and still have the possibility of going back in a year, it's still there because you have the medical.
Well, just for clarification, they're on different tracks. Medical has its own act, and everyone had to allow for the possibility of zoning. Okay. Recreational is the only act that we can opt out.
Okay. So either way, opting in, like the other lady said, to keep the possibility of getting one of those 73 or 173 the licenses later on is probably be slimmer, But if we opt in and we put in there the restrictions that we can control it a little bit better, might be a better option to have it. You have the control, and that's what's important, is controlling it. And without it, you have that possibility of even the special uses, like they said. But the importance of being able to restrict it. So if you opt in and you restrict it, and that's where your power is.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hannah Otten. I work in the office of State Rep Joyce Mason. She represents Gurnee, and just want to thank you for facilitating this discussion and all you do for Gurnee and for all of these really passionate residents. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, my name's Liz Nelson. I've lived in the village for 5 years, but I grew up in Wildwood, and so I went to Warren and it was not your student, but I was there when you were teaching. So I just wanted to say I would vote for, or hope that you will vote to opt out of this. I have a 17-year-old with bipolar disorder. While he will be 21 someday, even with it being 21, the teenagers have friends who are close to that age, or they have siblings, and so they still have social access to it, even if they aren't legally able to get in. So just having it in our community makes it a little bit more accessible to them. So I would like to distance it from as much as possible. I mean, we have a big movement with the Go Gurnee, having that healthy brand. I just think that it goes against that, so I hope that we will opt out.
Thank you. Sir, if you want to make another comment, you can come to the microphone again. It would be at a business meetings, and so I need to give another trustee a chance to speak, but what I'm hoping is that the board will either ask the staff to do research. If the board wants to do research to opt in, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but we would have to take a vote at a regular meeting in public, and we would notice it. It would be noticed that it's on our agenda, it's the night we're going to have a vote. I don't know that we'd need to have another informal discussion like we're having now. The survey's open until the 13th of September, so again, unless everybody's already kind of leaning one way or the other, we may wait for the survey results.
Regarding your survey, Mayor, how is that being advertised to the population of Gurnee that are residents?
So we put out a press release which goes to the press. Many of them did a story. We had it on Nextdoor. We have it on the village's Facebook page, the village's website. We have it on the mayor's Facebook page. Many of the Facebook groups that are specific to Gurnee have shared it. Many of the trustees have shared it on their pages. So I think I had...
Is there a way to possibly put out an information pamphlet out to the residents? So this way you have more valid input from the residents of Gurnee.
So you're saying to mail out a survey?
A mail out, or I recently got a newsletter from the village. I didn't see it in the newsletter from the village talking about cannabis. So it wasn't advertised.
That newsletter was done in July, and we didn't even have this scheduled yet. We can talk about that.
Okay, because you guys knew it was law by the state by that time.
We didn't know when we were going to schedule this discussion and get all the parties.
All about informing our residents, Mayor.
But yeah, we can think about that. And we used to mail surveys every year, and we didn't get a lot of response. Yeah, no, I recognize we have a lot of senior citizens. Yeah, we have a lot of senior citizens that rely on our newsletter because they don't have access to Facebook and stuff. We didn't do it on Twitter or Instagram, did we? It was on Twitter. Okay.
My name is Audrey Benz, and I'm all for medical marijuana.
It just breaks my heart that this community, which I've lived in since 1977, is considering recreational marijuana. Those of you who are for it, I don't think you've ever had a son who is older than 21 who's got addicted to marijuana. You say it's not addictive, it's habit forming, okay, perhaps not addictive. Who, over 21, spent time in the basement smoking marijuana. I know I shouldn't have allowed it in my house, but I did. He vegetated on marijuana. My mistake, I shouldn't have allowed it, but I just made a mistake. It is addictive. It is not something you want in this community. I urge you to opt out. Take a moral stance, Gurnee. Make the tough decision. The easy one is go with the flow. Everybody does marijuana. It's in vogue now. That's the easy decision. That is the easy decision. Take a tough stance. Be strong and vote and opt out of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't be so tough on yourself. I think all the mothers in the room have been in your shoes, including myself. Yeah, it's... Go ahead, Norm.
I just have a question for Mr. Ziegler. You had said one of the places that a medical marijuana would be in that shopping center by Olive Garden, correct?
As of right now, the current zoning would allow it as a special use.
And therefore, could there be a recreational marijuana sold there too?
That depends upon what buffer standards are adopted by the board. So it's all up, everything, that was just a reminder as to where we are right now with the medical. Nothing has been established for the recreational use.
What I'm thinking of is all the traffic coming to Great America. They could, just as you're making it very easy for recreational marijuana to be sold.
Which is exactly why we don't have liquor license in the gas station.
Pardon?
Exactly why we don't have liquor licenses in the gas station.
Hello, my name is Ken Rocher. I've been a resident of Gurnee for 17 years. I am a retired police officer. I did exclusively for 3 years nothing but DUI investigations. I think it's a horrible idea, and I hope that you opt out. With that said, though, I've been listening to all this and watching some of this, and I'm going to stick strictly with facts. Mr. Winter, you said that the first year there'll be 73 licenses across the entire state and 110 additional ones in the second. There are 101 or 102 counties in Illinois, meaning that the first year there won't even be one per county. We may not be able to get one anyway, at all.
Well, but you saw the graphic about the medical. I mean, it will be driven by population with the county of 700 and approximately 10,000 people. I think that there's a scoring mechanism for that. So people should anticipate that there will be several dispensaries in Lake County.
And while there may be several in Lake County, there are, I used to know the number, there's in excess of 40 communities.
Yes,
in
yeah,
Lake County.
We have portions of whole or in part 42 communities.
So back to, it's entirely possible, even if it was decided, I hate the term opt-in because you don't need to opt in.
Correct.
You just do nothing.
Right.
So if you do nothing, it's entirely possible that one wouldn't open in Gurnee in the first year or the second year because they could get absorbed by other places throughout Lake County. Therefore, with that logic, I don't see the harm in opting out. The likelihood of us getting one isn't high, and as the presentation was done, Naperville doesn't want to be the guinea pig. I don't see why we should be either. I do accept that, again, retired law enforcement, the problem is going to drive through Gurnee one way or the other, so I understand that completely. Gurnee opted out of gambling, and that was 5 years ago? Am I correct on that?
2012, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been
7
too
years
long.
ago?
Yeah.
The reality is, gambling, other than its appearance, doesn't affect the community. It more affects the household, where marijuana is going to affect the community, not just the household. So, and I have two questions. One I may not be allowed to ask, but I'll ask and you can tell me I can't. The first one, and I'm sure I can ask this one, has anyone talked with representatives from Six Flags, Great Wolf Lodge, or Gurnee Mills, since they substantially support this community,
Yes.
to see what they have to say about this?
I've had private conversations. So
Okay.
they,
And they
and
will
obviously
remain
they
private.
would support, they'll support the village, but they are also able to make their own decisions about what businesses, like Simon Group can make their own, will make their own decision about certain businesses, whether we do nothing, opt in or opt out. Six Flags will have their own policy, and so will Great Wolf, as far as consumption on the premises and stuff.
And I'm sure for Simon, that's a double-edged sword for them, because they would love to have the rental revenue from an open storefront, but they'd hate to have whatever trouble may come from
Yeah,
this.
their reputational brand is very important to them.
Okay. The question that I have, that if it's not acceptable, please tell me. I've already heard from Mr. Garner how his today's impression is. Can we hear from the rest of the board what today's impression is? I accept that they may change their mind in the future.
I don't mind, it's no secret, especially with staff, we wouldn't even have alcohol licenses if it was up to me. So I am probably very, very conservative because of our family image, because I don't like, there's nothing I hate more than walking in with my children or my grandchildren into a gas station and the first thing we see is beer. I think it sends the wrong message. So we allow the sale of alcohol, but we are extraordinarily conservative, and we are definitely punitive on drunk driving. So, I don't think it fits our image. But, reality is it's going to come here anyways, and we are going to have to pay for the extra enforcement. So if we took an approach like we have with medical marijuana, where we have a lot of overlays, I'd love to see that map with alcohol licenses, no alcohol license within 500 feet. It gets so narrow that, it may not be. So I don't have a problem. I wish we jumped on vaping too. I regret that we didn't do something about vaping sooner. And now we can't do anything, but we had a chance, and we should have done something. So it's just, again, we have to protect our children. I mean, there's just so much that is so dangerous to our children. I mean, the things that we worry about or keep us up at night trying to protect our children that we know we can't stop. These are things we can, or at least mitigate. So I'm on the record. I don't know if any of the other board, after public comment, I was going to ask the board to weigh in. So Trustee O'Brien, I know you, and he wanted to make some comments too.
Well, actually, most of my comments were answered, so thank you very much to everyone who commented and brought up excellent points. My one question, though, for Mr. Ziegler. Oh, I'm sorry, you're still speaking, sir.
No, I was listening to answers.
Okay. So, Mr. Ziegler, as you brought up, there's only a certain number of facilities that are going to be allowed in the state anyway, and then I found out we might have multiple in Lake County. But is there going to be a limit on the size of one of these dispensaries? How big do they get?
Square footage, would there be?
I've not seen anything in the state legislation that would limit the footprint, the size of it. I think a lot of it's going to be driven by parking demand, by, and by the market. How big of a space do they actually need to, cater to the clientele? So I don't know that a size really is going to have a big factor.
Just curious, because if we allow it, then there might be a reason to put, besides just ordinances, maybe a size of how large that building might be as an example. Because otherwise, if we're the only one in northern Lake County that gets one, that one may come in and turn into a large venue. I don't know. So I'll give you my opinion. I did a lot of research on this, and I started my position specifically by saying there's no way I want it for a bunch of personal and family reasons. There's no way I want it. Then I realized that the governor made my decision for me about whether or not there's going to be legalized marijuana. I wasn't happy about that either. And then I realized that we're going to have people in our community, because we have 3 major attractions coming to our town, and there will be people in our town with driving under the influence. And I know how expensive it is for our one officer to be able to identify what's going on. I just found out tonight that's another $8,000 per officer to be trained. Those are all costs that we're going to have to pay. And then, if we're going to have, and I haven't still made up my mind, I'm still studying, but if we're going to have costs because of other communities allowing it, for instance, Park City said we're open for business, and someone from our community very well may drive to Park City, buy, and maybe even smoke over there, and drive back here. Officer Gaylor, I just have a quick question. I don't know, how long does marijuana stay in the system? Like, for instance, when you go to a bar, if you drink 3 wines an hour, then you're drunk or something like that. I don't know the rules. By the way, I don't drink, I don't smoke. I don't swear very much either, really, so. It's,
I haven't been formally trained on those specifics.
Can I answer the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I do know the answer. It's anywhere between 30 and 60 days
Oh, my goodness.
of having some amount of THC in your bloodstream. Now, is that enough to be intoxicated or impaired or whatever? No. Nobody's really too sure on that, and that's part of the whole problem. It is a fatty substance organism, for lack of a better word, where alcohol has ridiculously short half-life, is the best way you could put it.
Okay.
The body expels at a rate of 0.015 an hour alcohol. So if you are at 0.075, which is just a hair below the legal limit, it would take you 5 hours to expel all that alcohol. Where if I were to smoke some cannabis right now, and 15 days from now get into a traffic accident, and it left me unconscious, and I were taken to a hospital and be given a blood urine test, I would fail. And it probably had nothing to do with the crash. Unfortunately, when the state of Illinois made this law, they did it in a weekend. And that's what they did with all those laws. They did it in a weekend. There's no way you can tell me they thought of everything. They did it poorly. They've done lots of other laws poorly, quickly, and this is just going to be another one. And it's another reason to opt out and not be a part of this, for lack of a better word, spontaneous combustion that took place of passing, I think it was 15 different laws in one weekend. And they actually extended the weekend so that they could get it done.
I recognize the family, thank you very much, by the way. I recognize the family-friendly nature of our community. Our 3 biggest sources of revenue are family-friendly. And so to send a message that we allow for it is not a wise move, but then I also bounce back and forth to say, we're going to have expenses here. If someone's having it, maybe we should have it and receive the 3% on the sales. So then I went to look, I asked for where we're at so far with the survey, and if we represent the people of this community, so far, the people of this community want it. Not in this room. In this room, actually, it's really close to 50-50. And even on some of the numbers, they are close to 50-50 if you go strongly opposed, or if you go strongly against, it's about 50-50. But if you put in the same categories, strongly opposed versus, and somewhat opposed versus strongly support versus somewhat support, all of a sudden the scales are tipped significantly towards the community wanting it. And so that's not Quinn just making up Quinn's mind. That's the community saying, we as a community of 30,000 people, or well, actually of 112 so far, but that's how surveys are. But hopefully there'll be more answers to that later on. So I've got 7 pages of notes that I took even before I walked into this room, and I've taken a whole bunch more. I don't have the answer, Mayor. I just am taking in more and more information saying, gosh, I don't know the answer, but I sure wish Governor Pritzker hadn't done that to us. Sir.
As you stated, what the governor did, made a decision without putting it on a ballot to the people in the state of Illinois. Is there an option for it going on a ballot in Gurnee? somewhere down the line, if we opt out in the following year, you put it on a ballot. This way people would be informed in Gurnee. There's a lot of people in Gurnee that are not informed. And I can guarantee you that.
We've done non-binding, we had a non-binding referendum put on the township on gambling, which I don't think that, you know what? Six Flags was a non-binding referendum to allow Six Flags. So, I mean, there's nothing that says we can't put something on. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my
yes.
biggest thing.
We could
Government
we could
makes
put it on a
decisions for people
ballot.
all the time, and they don't have everybody's thing. And that's why I'm like, try to give people the most information you can. before
Sir,
you
I
make a
can tell you
decision.
right now, I'll get more people voting on Facebook than we ever get in a local election.
I'm not a social media
I mean, we had
fan.
9% turnout the last time.
I know that technology now.
But, I mean, that is always an option, especially a non-binding referendum.
I just brought it up as
villages
something
use
to think
that.
about,
Yeah,
that's all.
we've used that in the past, so that is something. And like Quinn said, it's running strongly in favor of recreational. Any of the...
Survey should be sent out to everybody, though. I'm active on Facebook, so I filled it out. He would have no clue that the survey's out there. So I think there's a lot of people like him and like you who have no idea that the survey's out there. So I really think on such an important issue where there's strong opinions that it merits going out to all the citizens.
Okay, we'll talk, I mean, it's a good point. It is another way to do it. It's just, we never got good results when we sent them out before, so, but this may be different, so we can discuss that. That's definitely an option that we have, so. Sir, I need, it's your first time, so we need to get your name on the microphone, please.
Yeah, yes, I just heard the other day that 62% nationally, the people are in favor of legalization. That's more than a 3/5 majority, so.
And your name, please, for the record? Your name for the record,
Oh,
please?
I'm sorry, George Millhouse, resident of Waukegan.
That's
but
fine.
I do a lot of business here in
We
your
welcome
fair
everybody.
town. Donate blood on a regular basis at the Vitalent, the former
All right, thank you.
Life Source Centers.
Do any of the other trustees want to weigh in? I think, Trustee Thorstensen?
So I would like to see, I'd like to get all the residents' input to make a decision. I don't know if it was a structured survey, my guess not, because they're very, very costly to know that who has voted, didn't vote more than once, did I register my home address? It's gotta be unique. So that I'm not from out of state and things such as that. So that's why I would say that a referendum would give us that, although of course, like the mayor said, very few people, you know, you see who comes out to vote.
And there's no election before January 1st, so if we do nothing before January 1st, then we can, as many as can get licenses, they can situate anywhere. It would be, we need to do
Right.
something.
So with the information in front of me, I would opt out.
Right. And again, we're not making a decision tonight. We are trying to give the staff some idea of where we want them to invest their time. Trustee Garner?
I would just like to see the dispensary owners take some responsibility for the additional cost to the community. I think that it is unfair to the taxpayer to give you license to make as much money as you want, and we absorb all the negative impact to the community. I don't hear anybody talking about at a minimum, splitting the cost with the municipality when it comes to the accidents, the psychiatry visits, and all the negative impact to the high school and the kids and the whole 9 yards. It's always you win, we lose. Is there any reason why that's the case?
Before you answer, the state, even if we opt out, the state is going to share some of the revenue with us. It's a small piece, but some. And if we choose to opt in, we can add up to 3% on top of the sales tax. and of the sales tax, we get 2%. So we could get up to 5% off the sale of, which probably isn't even come close to covering all the costs. But you're probably getting into disparate treatment with one business having to pay some costs versus other. But the state is trying to give some revenue to the communities, even if they opt out, for some of that enforcement.
I still think that they should pay for the cost to society.
Yeah, I don't know that, yeah.
They should pay too.
I
I
know.
get it, but we add layer after layer after layer, and it's expensive. Who wins? They do.
Yeah. Again, that's kind of back to that disparate treatment. So, but I agree, Greg, there is a cost to us. Okay.
Is it possible I could read
Yeah, I'll
something
let the
that-
last two, and then I'm going to close the floor, because the board does need to give some direction to staff. But, sir,
Oh,
go right ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. The effect of cannabis compared with alcohol on driving. Epidemiological studies have been inconclusive regarding whether cannabis use causes an increased risk of accidents. In contrast, unanimity exists that alcohol use increases crash risk. Surprisingly, given the alarming results of cognitive studies, most marijuana-intoxicated drivers show only modest impairment on actual road tests. Experienced smokers who drive on a set course show almost no functional impairment under the influence of marijuana. Let's see. There's another part of it, the stepping, the gateway theory, that marijuana leads to other drugs. Let's see. The majority of people who use marijuana do not go on to use other harder substances. Also, cross-sensitization is not unique to marijuana. Alcohol and nicotine also prime the brain for a heightened response to other drugs, and are, like marijuana, also typically used before a person progresses to more harmful substances. Now, if there's a more harmful substance than alcohol, I don't know how alcohol could be a gateway drug, because it's considered one of the most dangerous drugs on earth. But that's what it says.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
Jeff Olson again. To address your concerns with the owners of the dispensaries just becoming wealthy and not, and walking away and turning their back to the community is not what our company is all about. I mentioned earlier that we have a vested interest in our communities, and I do live in Lake County, and we would be working directly with the cities to provide them with what they need to help both ends meet. That this isn't something that we are deciding to be greedy with, but we have a very vested interest in helping the community thrive with the benefit of having a dispensary in Gurnee.
Thank you. All right, you're the last one.
All right, I'm the last one. I do want to hear the final two trustees. Interested to hear what all of your positions are, but I did want to speak also. I read something before, but speak from the heart. And this is also another reason to consider opting out. I have a recent high school graduate from Warren Township High School, and his experience and the experience of being with, seeing him and his friends, vaping is a huge problem at Warren Township High School. My son got addicted to nicotine by not really even knowing. He was naive, not even knowing what he was doing, vaping, taking, and he's 18 years old, or he was the first to turn 18, and he had all these different friends, and I spent so much time talking about you know, don't drive your friends to go in, who are underage now at 17, to go and get vape for them. We had to get them on nicotine. I'm sure he's going to be real happy with me saying this, but had to get them on nicotine to get off of it. The kids didn't realize what they're doing. They were all becoming addicted to nicotine through vaping. We're just opening up the doors to giving parents even more problems, because we know that there's going to be kids that are out there that are going to turn 21 who have friends that go to CLC, have friends that are still in high school, brothers, sisters, what have you. We're just opening up the door for more problems. So I don't want it for my family. I don't want to make it easier. I just think the social ills outweigh any sort of minimal revenue that we would get, and it's bad for the image of the town as well. So I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, we're not making a decision tonight. Do we want to give staff some indication of, are they going to spend some more time doing some, David doing some more maps and looking at what some of the buffers could be, or we're just like, we're kind of not interested? And we'll take a vote. Trustee Hoy?
I've just heard so much I've learned a lot tonight, and I think that probably what I've learned most of is that we don't know. Both sides have good arguments, and I guess when you don't know, then why would we vote to let it in and find out what we don't know? So that's the hard part. I mean, if you say, well, I'd like to vote to let it in, it's like, well, but I don't know enough. So even creating buffer zones and things like that, I'm still letting it in, and I don't know if that's the right decision or not. So I'm just sitting in a place where I don't have enough information, and I don't know that any of the communities have enough information about the impact or effect or cost, or are we making money, losing money. So I wouldn't want to ask staff to put a lot of time into something that I still think I don't know. I don't have an answer. I need time.
Would you feel better with survey results?
Well, that help. It helps, but it's not going to give me an answer, because they have the same, I'm guessing that the members of the community have the same amount of information, or I probably have more than they do now, because I've listened to all these people.
And we are putting all these presentations on our websites.
Right, but I'm sitting here, and it's, that one gentleman says, it's just a lot of people they have other things to do than listen to presentations on cannabis. And, I got the opportunity to listen to it, so I have a lot more information. So, but I still feel like I'm way short. So I don't think, I'd be reluctant to have staff spend a lot of time at this point where we just need more information. But
Trustee Balmas, kind of same feeling, or?
Yeah, it's a very hard topic. I am a product of the 60s, and unlike Clinton, I did inhale. I'll just put it out there. And I could see how serious incapacitation is. If you have some good stuff, it puts you out. And but we allow alcohol. And the nice thing about marijuana is you're far more mellow. You know, they always point to Woodstock and say, you know, there were no incidents at Woodstock and there were thousands of young people there who are higher than a kite, you know, and it was a mellow event. Whereas alcohol, we tend to get a little emotional and erratic, and it's a tough one. And, you know, you allow alcohol, but you don't allow marijuana. It's a tough, tough, tough decision. But I know also how you can be out of it, and I'm not really pro it. At this point, I would tend to be opting out, but I believe that there are people who do well with the medical marijuana because of health conditions, and it helps them. But what Kim wasn't able to get out was she got addicted to and had to go through a withdrawal from the painkillers and that. And it was very hard, and it's very emotional for her. So that's frightening too. It's so tough. But I would,
So more information
more
maybe.
information would definitely help make a decision, more input from the community to make this tough decision, because that's what we're here for, is to represent our community.
Okay. Well, we can make a survey happen, and we can make it representative, certain amount. We have the ways to make it statistically relevant and representative, and we'll work on that tomorrow. We could do the survey and take the social media survey and combine all of that. David can do some maps for us to see what that looks like. I don't know that I would devote another committee of the whole meeting to this topic. I think we could get survey results circulated, get some feedback, and then schedule it at a board meeting so that the public would know we're going to be taking some action. And we can certainly publish the survey results too for the public, so.
When would the next Keeping Posted be out? October? So I mean, it would be something that could be addressed in the Keeping Posted, because that goes to all the homes too, so.
Yeah, we can get the survey out separate. We've done it before. Okay. All right, well, that's a little bit of direction. Survey. Okay. And then David can do some maps for us. With some buffers and stuff based on what some other communities have done. See where it goes from there. I truly appreciate everybody coming tonight. This is probably the longest meeting we've had in several years. Sitting through this, it is a weighty decision. I mean, the video gambling was pretty easy. And we struggle over decisions with alcohol licenses and stuff, because it does impact our community. We want to make sure we reflect the values of the community. So, again, thank you for coming. I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by trustee Ballmer, second by trustee O'Brien. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.